The Kovar were a species built on probabilities. Their society, their technology, even their art forms, were all derived from complex algorithms calculating the most likely, most efficient, most resource-sound path forward. They were pragmatic to a fault, their sleek, silver-skinned bodies moving with deliberate grace through starships designed for optimal energy conservation and minimal risk. They viewed the universe as a vast equation to be solved, and they approached its challenges with caution and meticulous planning. Expansion was a carefully considered, slow creep, never overextending, always ensuring a fallback position. Humanity, to the Kovar, was a statistical anomaly, a blip of reckless energy in the galactic calculus. Humans explored with what the Kovar termed unwarranted enthusiasm, pushing into unknown territories with flimsy ships and even flimsier contingency plans. Their colonies often clung to barely habitable worlds, their expansion driven more by a restless spirit than by logical assessment. The Kovar watched, from a safe, analytical distance, predicting that this pointless tenacity, this refusal to accept inevitable setbacks, would eventually lead to humanity's widespread collapse. It was not a malicious prediction, merely a probable outcome based on their extensive data. The human colony ship Hope's Gamble was a perfect example of this human recklessness. An aging, repurposed freighter, it was packed to the brim with hopeful families, roughneck engineers, and optimistic agronomists, all bound for a marginal system deemed potentially viable by human hyperwave surveyors. The Kovar, whose own long-range scans had dismissed the same system as resource-deficient and energetically unstable, logged the Hope's Gamble's trajectory with a silent, internal sigh of statistical inevitability. Inevitability, in this case, arrived in the form of an uncharted gravitic shear. The Hope's Gamble, already straining under the load of its hopeful cargo, was caught, twisted, and spat out into the void, crippled and far off course. Its emergency beacons, faint and sputtering, painted a desperate picture before they died. Catastrophic engine failure, life support critical, trajectory decaying towards a Class 7 death world designated by galactic cartographers as XB-197, or, in the more evocative slang of daring asteroid miners, Tartarus X. Tartarus X was a place where hope went to be systematically dismantled. Its atmosphere was a corrosive cocktail of sulfurous fumes and abrasive grit, whipped into planet-spanning storms by the gravitational pull of its unstable, bloated red giant sun. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, from searing daytime heat that could melt lead to cryogenic nights that could shatter steel. And then there was the wildlife. Hyper-aggressive, silicon-based megafauna, perfectly adapted to their brutal environment, viewing anything carbon-based as an unwelcome and probably edible intrusion. The Kovar Monitoring Post Epsilon 7, commanded by Chief Analyst Threll, picked up the Hope's Gamble's final, desperate signals. Threll, a Kovar of considerable experience and impeccable logic, ran the calculations. Distance to Tartarus X from nearest Kovar outpost. Extreme. Resources required for a rescue attempt. Prohibitive. Probability of human survivor viability on Tartarus X after atmospheric entry and impact. 0.003%. Probability of sustained survival beyond one local solar cycle. Statistically indistinguishable from zero. Log the event, Threll instructed his subordinate, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. Human vessel Hope's Gamble, presumed lost with all hands on Tartarus X, no rescue feasible or advisable. Update human casualty projections accordingly. It was a regrettable loss of sentient life, but sentiment had no place in efficient galactic accounting. The universe was, after all, a dangerous place, especially for the ill-prepared. For 20 standard galactic years, Tartarus X remained a red blotch on Kovar star charts, a symbol of cosmic indifference and a minor data point in their ongoing assessment of human expansionist folly. Then, a Kovar long-range survey vessel, the Probability Engine, was tasked with a routine deep space mapping mission that brought it through the desolate Tartarus system. Its mission profile included a cursory sensor sweep of all planetary bodies, more for navigational hazard avoidance than for any expectation of discovery. Sub-analyst Vaughan was on duty, a young Kovar still fresh from the probability academies, his silver skin gleaming faintly in the dim light of the survey bridge. He was monitoring the passive sensor feeds, mostly a monotonous hiss of background radiation and stellar debris. As Tartarus X swam into sensor range, Vaughan expected the usual bleak readings. Toxic atmosphere, extreme radiation, no complex energy signatures beyond geological activity. Instead, an anomaly flickered across his console. A tiny, localized pocket of structured energy. And something else. Trace elements in the upper atmosphere that didn't quite match the planet's known corrosive profile. Elements like oxygen, nitrogen, water vapor, fleeting, almost imperceptible but undeniably there. Chief Analyst Threll, Vaughan transmitted, his voice carefully neutral, though a flicker of unusual probability calculations was running through his mind. Threll, now a senior figure at Sector Command, but remotely overseeing this survey due to its proximity to a region of minor theoretical interest, responded almost instantly. Report, Sub-Analyst. Sir, Vaughan said, XB-197, Tartarus X, we are detecting anomalous energy signatures, localized, structured, and atmospheric trace readings inconsistent with baseline planetary composition, suggesting artificial origin. Threll's mental archives word, Tartarus X, the Hope's gamble, 20 years, impossible. Specify structured energy, Sub-Analyst, Threll requested, already running his own simulations. Low-level electromagnetic fields, sir, consistent with rudimentary power generation, and a faint, repeating radio signal, heavily degraded, almost lost in the planetary storm static. It appears to be a human emergency locator beacon, an old model, very old. Threll felt something that no Kovar was supposed to feel, something that defied all his carefully constructed probability matrices, a sense of profound disbelief. Descend to optimal observation altitude, Sub-Analyst Vaughan, full sensor array. Exercise extreme caution. And Vaughan confirmed that beacon. The probability engine altered course, its sleek form slipping through the outer tendrils of Tartarus X's violent atmosphere. The planet below was a hellscape of jagged, rust-colored mountains, canyons belching sulfurous steam, and vast, storm-racked plains where the very ground seemed to writhe under the lash of grit-laden winds. The ship shuddered as turbulence buffeted it. Then, through a momentary break in the swirling, toxic clouds, Vaughan saw it. Not a graveyard of twisted metal, not the scattered remains of a doomed voyage, but a settlement. A small, brutalized, but undeniably active settlement, nestled in a deep ravine, partially shielded from the worst of the winds. Domes, patched and scoured by the elements, huddled together. Lines of what looked like cultivated vegetation, a sickly, hardy green, clung to life under protective transparent canopies. And around the perimeter, a crude but effective-looking barrier of sharpened rock and what appeared to be massive, fossilized bones. The energy signatures resolved, geothermal taps drawing power from the planet's unstable core. The faint radio beacon pulsed steadily from a battered communications tower, and there were life signs, dozens of them, human. Chief Analyst Threll watched the incoming visual feed on his command center screen, light years away. His usually placid silver features were, for once, unreadable. The other Kovar analysts in the room had stopped their work, their attention drawn to the impossible images. They are alive, Vaughan whispered over the calm, his voice laced with an awe that was distinctly un-Kovar. Sir, they appear to be farming in this environment, and there are defensive structures. They've built a life here. The probability engine cautiously circled the settlement, its sensors painting an ever more astonishing picture. The humans were not just surviving, they were adapting. Their technology was a bizarre amalgamation of salvaged ship components, jury-rigged repairs, and crude but ingenious inventions clearly born of desperation. The atmospheric filters on their domes were constantly being eroded by the corrosive air, yet they were constantly being patched, reinforced, improved. The hardy crops they grew were mutated strains, crossbred for resilience against the planet's toxic soil and feeble sunlight. But the most startling discovery was yet to come. As the Quvar ship drifted over a large, fenced-in enclosure near the edge of the settlement, Vaughn's optical sensors zoomed in. Inside were creatures. Massive, six-legged reptilian beasts, their hides like armored plates, their heads sporting rows of razor-sharp teeth. These were the infamous Tartaran razorbacks, one of the planet's apex predators, creatures that hunted in packs and could tear through starship-grade alloys. And the humans were herding them. Not in cages, but in a managed pasture. Some humans, clad in thick, environmentally sealed suits made of scavenged materials, were moving amongst the razorbacks, guiding them with long, electrified prods. It was clear that these were not wild animals. They were, in some unfathomable way, domesticated, or at least a very dangerous working relationship had been established. Threll, Vaughn said, his voice barely a breath. The megafauna. They have domesticated the Tartaran razorbacks. They are using them as beasts of burden, and possibly for defense. That was the moment the Quvar's carefully constructed understanding of the universe, and humanity's place within it, began to crumble. This wasn't tenacity. This was something else entirely. This was a stubborn, almost insane, refusal to acknowledge the concept of impossibility. They hadn't just survived on a planet that should have killed them within days. They had bent it, ever so slightly, to their will. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had apparently decided to negotiate terms. A small shuttle detached from the human settlement and began a slow, cautious ascent towards the probability engine. It was a battered, ugly thing, clearly patched together from scraps, but it flew with a defiant steadiness. Quvar vessel, a voice crackled over the comms, heavily accented, distorted by static, but unmistakably human. This is Acting Governor Jana Riley of Tartarus Colony. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. We are armed. Threll found his vocalizer took a moment to engage. Tartarus Colony, this is Chief Analyst Threll of the Quvar Survey. We are on a peaceful mapping mission. We detected your beacon. We had presumed no survivors. A dry, humorless chuckle came from the human shuttle. Presumed? Ha! Yeah, well, we had other plans. Took us a while to get the big dish working again. 20 years is a long time to be presumed dead. The Quvar invited Acting Governor Riley aboard the probability engine. When she emerged from her shuttle, clad in a patched, bulky environmental suit, she was a testament to Tartarus X's harshness. Her face, visible through a scarred visor, was weathered and lined, her eyes holding a weariness that spoke of unimaginable hardship, but also an unyielding, flinty resolve. She was not old in years, but she carried the weight of generations. She told them the story, the crash, the first horrific years, the constant storms, the relentless attacks by native predators, the dwindling supplies, the sheer, bloody-minded refusal to die that had gripped the survivors. Captain Eva Rostova, the original commander who had famously declared, "Tartarus wants us dead," will disappoint it. How they had learned, through brutal trial and error, which plants were merely poisonous and which were instantly lethal. How they'd discovered the geothermal vents that offered warmth and power. How they'd first encountered the razorbacks, not as food, but as a terror that had nearly wiped them out, until a crazy, half-starved engineer named Sparks got the idea that if you couldn't beat them, maybe you could redirect them. We lost a lot of good people taming those first few razorbacks, Riley said, her voice flat. A lot. But they learned, or we learned them. Now they pull our plows, carry our heavy loads, and nothing out there messes with a settlement guarded by a herd of grumpy razorbacks. She even managed a thin smile. Turns out, their hides make pretty good dome patches too, once you figure out how to cure 'em without dissolving your own skin. She spoke of the long dark, a decade where their sun had dimmed due to stellar activity, and they'd survived on bioluminescent fungi and sheer grit. She spoke of the breaking, a period of internal despair when many wanted to give up, but a handful had, quite literally, refused to let them, sometimes through force of will, sometimes through actual force. Giving up wasn't an option we could afford, she stated simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Every life here was bought too dear to just stop. The Kovar listened, their probability models shattering with every word. They had calculated human survival at near zero. They had not factored in the human capacity for illogical, insane, almost godlike stubbornness when pushed to the absolute brink. They had not understood that for some humans, impossible was not a conclusion, but a challenge. The discovery of the Tartarus colony sent ripples of shock and profound re-evaluation throughout the Kovar ascendancy. Tartarus X, the symbol of certain death, became Tartarus colony, the monument to human indomitability. Kovar xenopsychologists and sociologists were dispatched, cautiously, to study the colonists. They wanted to understand this stubborn refusal to die, this grit, this bizarre human trait of achieving the impossible not through superior technology or grand strategy, but through sheer, unyielding willpower and a collective agreement that failure was simply not on the menu, no matter how ludicrous the odds. Humanity's standing in the galaxy shifted subtly. They were still seen as somewhat reckless, somewhat chaotic. But now that recklessness was tinged with a grudging, almost fearful respect. If humans could do this on Tartarus X with nothing but wreckage and defiance, what could they achieve when truly united or when facing a threat to their entire species? The Kovar began to incorporate a new variable into their complex equations when dealing with humans: the Tartarus factor, an unpredictable coefficient representing humanity's capacity to achieve statistically improbable outcomes through sheer bloody-mindedness. And across the star lanes, among species both awed and unnerved by the tale, a new saying began to take root. Never tell a human the odds. They're liable to take it as a personal insult and do it anyway, just to spite you. The universe, the Kovar were beginning to learn, was not just an equation to be solved. Sometimes it was a story of defiance waiting to be written, and humans, it seemed, held a very stubborn pen.